Okay, so we just got through an eventful few days where Biden landed in Kyiv, and then Putin gave his speech, and we were expecting some kind of bombshell revelations from Putin, but it was just kind of ranting. What was interesting about Putin's speech was not what he said, but what he didn't say. So I took some notes on his speech, and I'm just going to go over a number of quotes in his speech, and I want to kind of unpack what Putin said along the way. So first, he started out by talking significantly about the West, like the West is bad, the West did this, the West is the problem. Talked about the neo-Nazi regime, and I'm going to give you a number of quotes. The neo-Nazi regime that had taken hold after the 2014 coup. Now, he really sincerely believes that in 2014, the West was behind the Maidan revolution. And I think he believes that because a liar doesn't believe anyone else. And what I mean by that is, this is the kind of thing the KGB would have been doing, so certainly the CIA must have been behind this because they turned the people to the West rather than to Russia, and so I think he really sincerely believes that. Another quote, "We were doing everything in our power to solve this problem by peaceful means." Well, to some degree, he's telling the truth. And what he's saying here is he actually did want to actually have the Minsk agreements, have some kind of elections in this occupied territory so that it could peacefully just become its own nation that was beholden to Russia and become that buffer zone. So he might be telling the truth there. Talked about the West's deception since the 2014 revolution. He said this, they will never wash off this shame because they were duplicitous this whole time, and that's how the West is. And so he started off with this diatribe against the West. It wasn't even about Ukraine itself. Then he talked about hundreds of U.S. bases all over the world and how the U.S. is this big aggressor, and they'll withdraw unilaterally from agreements. And the big news was he withdrew from a nuclear agreement that was not actually being enforced anyway. There wasn't inspections going on like there were, so okay. And so that was the big news. But he talked about Ukraine, and he said they started this war. Now, again, this is revisionist history. This isn't actually what happened. The little green men started the war. But to his mind, it was a coup overthrowing Ukraine, and he couldn't have that on their border. Then he said, "We are defending human lives," which is absolutely mind-numbingly just amazing to me. Like, how can you say this? You're destroying these people in Ukraine, and you're talking about how you're saving human lives? Another quote, "They let the genie out of the bottle." Another one, "They rob everyone under the guise of democracy." Now I want to stop on that one because I believe he believes that. He believes that, so the way that his democracy works is something akin to a puppet show. It's a kabuki theater. It's the guise of democracy, but he's really an authority, and he really believes that in the West, they don't really care about democracy. They just pay it lip service in order to rob their own people blind. He talked about how to deprive Russia of its historical territories that are now called Ukraine. Now that is an echo of his speech 1 year ago on the same day where he started talking about how we're this one nation. Now go back to the 2021, the February 21st, 2022 speech, and you'll hear him start in the first few paragraphs how we're one nation, the Kievan Rus and that kind of thing, and this whole Ukraine and modern Ukraine is a fiction. It's made up. It's artificial. By the Soviet Union, they set this up after circumstances, that kind of thing. But he really believes that there is what's happened is that real Russian territory has been stripped away and called this artificial entity of Ukraine, and that's what he's fighting over. So to deprive Russia of its historical territories that are now called Ukraine, when you read between the lines, what you see is he thinks this is really Russian land, and he's trying to take it back. Okay, talking about supporting the 2014 coup. Another quote, "We are not at war with the people of Ukraine." Well, I think the people of Ukraine would beg to differ. Even if, their mentality is so far different from the mentality in Russia. They have really latched on and really agree and support the concept of democracy. Regardless of how it's played out, they've just moved different directions, and the Ukrainians are in a different space than the Russians. He talked about the West's plan, which is Russia's strategic defeat. Okay, he's right. He got one. Even a blind squirrel can find a nut now and again, but that is true. The West does want to see a strategic Russian defeat, and that is because of what they have done. Before that, the West was like, oh, okay, Russia, what? I mean, if they weren't like that, you would know, because they would be preparing with the armament in order to take Russia down. But that they're running low, or that it's lower than anticipated, shows you that they weren't anticipating this. Okay, next. I am proud that the absolute majority of our citizens have taken a principled stand on the special military operation. Okay, I don't think that that's really the case. I think the majority of your citizens don't want to get thrown off a hotel balcony, and they realize that if they just stay apolitical, they will not be thrown off a hotel balcony more than likely. And so it's not so much, not speaking up is not a sign of support. Not speaking up is not a sign of opposition, and so he's taking it as a sign of that they're not speaking up as a sign of support, and that's not what it is. They're apolitical. They're not taking a stand. He said he was grateful to soldiers and teachers, etc. The teachers one was really interesting, because the teachers are re-indoctrinating, and he's talking about teachers in the occupied territories that are indoctrinating the Ukrainians into thinking like Russians. Crimea, which has now had a reliable land transport corridor with all of Russia. Okay, that line itself tells you this was part of the goal, was connecting Crimea and the rest of Russia through that corridor through Zaporizhia. And I think that was a really telling line. Then he talked about the veterans, he talked about defense plans, he talked about housing, he talked about the economy. And there was something really interesting about the economy. So he talked about how the GDP had only declined to 2.1%. I know something's not right about that. I don't have the time to go into that. But then he said this. He said the sanctions against Russia are merely a means to make them suffer. Well, yeah, that's what sanctions are designed to do. They're trying to say this is going to hurt you economically while you keep doing this bad behavior. That's correct. They said something even more telling, and I thought this was worth unpacking. However, their gamble failed to pay off, and he goes on and says unemployment rate was 4.7%, and now it is 3.7%. So it's not that the Russian machine is so big and bad that it is the unemployment is now at 3.7 because they're awesome. By the way, full employment is 3% or so, and that's where economists say your economy is just humming like you can't get any better, because there's always going to be some shifting in the economy. I know I'm nerding out, but that's where it is. But 4.7 to 3.7, part of this is because you have 300,000 newly occupied or newly pulled into service soldiers, so that causes that drop. Part of this is 1 million men have fled the country, so that means that there are fewer people trying to follow jobs, so it could be explained in just those few things. Now, an economist might look at it a little bit more in depth than what I am. I'm simplifying, but when you take 1.3 million people out of the equation, 4.7 to 3.7 doesn't look like you're a genius economically. It looks like there's a supply and demand issue, and that's what's caused it. Okay, so that's the unemployment rate. Let's go on. We must put an end to all interagency conflicts, red tape, grievances, doublespeak, or other nonsense. Everything we must do must contribute to achieving our goals. Okay, so that one's really interesting, because what he's saying is we have to stop this nonsense, which is admitting that this nonsense is happening. Conflicts, red tape, grievances, doublespeak, all these things are happening. It's like whenever you see a law, you know that something stupid happened. Like in the Magna Carta, they talk about like, you can't take our corn against our will, or can't make me build a bridge unless from times of old I was of a family of bridge makers, or something like that. Okay, when they're saying you can't take my corn, it's because they put it into law because somebody was taking your corn. So it's the same kind of thing here. So if he's talking about ending these conflicts, red tape, grievances, doublespeak, or other, there's a lot of infighting within the administration that he's trying to put the kibosh on. Okay, so but you don't think about that until you try to think about what's behind what is being said. He talked about how everything must contribute to achieving our goals. Then he talked about developing new roads to China, Iran, India and Pakistan and some other places in the Middle East. Now, why is he talking about that? Because he can't he can't trade with the West like he used to. So now he has to find a new way of buying and selling and trading. And he's touting it like, we're doing these great things. No, you're doing these out of necessity. That's why you're doing it. But he wasn't saying it that way. Then he got into some very strange, convoluted discussion about market reforms, but these market reforms must be protected by the state. And it was just a very bizarre kind of thing if you have any sense of how the market works. We talked about how not a single ordinary citizen in our country felt sorry for those who lost their assets in foreign banks. He was talking about oligarchs who take their money out of the country to the West and go own yachts and villas and whatever else. He's speaking to his base, saying, see, you shouldn't have done this. You should have stayed here and kept your money inside Russia. And if you were loyal to me, this wouldn't have happened to you. That's who he's talking to. And then I'm going to close with this. He said, the oligarchs must understand that they will always be second-class citizens there in the West. There is another option, to stay with your motherland. And so he's talking to them saying, you know, if you stay here loyal to me, not try, like, so what he's speaking to is that Western powers have frozen oligarchs' money in their banks, and they are going to be, in some cases, using them to pay for repairs in Ukraine. Putin, he's not threatened by the people. He's potentially threatened by the oligarchs. And if he keeps them, he keeps his power base. The people are so beat down, apolitical, they're not going to rise up. But the oligarchs, they could threaten Putin. And so Putin is speaking to them here. Okay, that's Putin's speech between the lines and behind what he's saying. I hope that helped you understand what was going on. If this was meaningful to you, give me a like or a thumbs up. Subscribe. You can buy me a cup of coffee. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being the kind of person that would listen to this, being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.